Now, the extent of the accusation against Shugden adherents or Shugden, the deity itself. So let us say the deity Shugden and the adherents both have been put into one and the same cup. There's been no separation made between the deity and the adherents. Now, because the deity is a devil, king of Lucifer, or the axis of all evil, or a devil or a demon, or the worst of all spirits, blah blah, etc., etc. Since you don't follow Tibetan news and Tibetan gossip, and even if there is English or even circulations in your language, because you don't seem to have interests in these issues, or you probably think this is purely Tibetan politics. So therefore, you might be missing the point. You probably may have not been informed about what has been happening. But to come to it, what I'm trying to say as I am, and I repeat once again, no separation has been made between the deity and its adherents or followers, in the sense that the deity has to be a very horrible axis of evil, the devil, the father of Lucifer, etc., etc., to make the adherents equally evil and bad. So what are the adherents, or the prominent celebrated adherents of Dorje Shuk? Then what are they supposed to be? They are supposed to be fundamentalist, conservative, narrow-minded, sectarian, even to the extent that they are supposed to be the Taliban of the Tibetan Buddhists, amongst the Tibetan Buddhists. So I think there's only one more name left for us, that is the ISISI. So we probably now, this year or the coming year, we probably might be awarded with the title of being the Buddhist ISISI. Even if we have not even thought about cutting or hacking off onions or tomatoes, but we probably might be renamed or re-Christianed as the Tibetan Buddhist ISISI. That goes to say the extremity and the extreme fabrication and untruthful allegation about Dorje Shugden followers. Now, incidentally, if you're talking about non-sectarianism is something everybody with common sense, good thinking, good heart, and equality and democratical orientation will certainly think towards that direction. Nobody has a problem with the issue or the term non-sectarianism. But you have to understand the issue of non-sectarianism, or the way non-sectarianism is being made out in the Tibetan diasporan community under the leadership of the Tibetan political and religious head as such, to understand what he actually means by non-sectarianism. But before we talk about what he actually means by non-sectarianism, let me put it in the sense, or let me put it in the way of how one should be non-biased, non-sectarian. How should one be non-sectarian, unbiased? How should one be tolerant? How should one be respectful of all religious beliefs? We are not only talking about the Tibetan Buddhist traditions or the Theravadan and the Mahayana or Vajrayanis. We are not only talking about that, we are talking about all religions at large. To fundamentally have respect for all religions, to tolerate, not only tolerate, respect each other's view, even if it is a view related to sexual preferences and orientations, and view related to whether you want to believe in a religion or not, the freedom to do so and the freedom to be able to live one's life accordingly. I would call that non-sectarianism. Suppose you do not believe in any religion, so to say. You are an atheist. You do not believe in any religion. Say, for example, you're a hedonist. Does that mean you disparage or despise other religions or other faiths? Does that necessarily mean so? No. If you speak of a sexual preference and if you say you are gay, does that mean you hate lesbians or you hate transsexuals? or you hate bisexuals, or you hate heterosexuals. Does it necessarily mean that? Does that become an issue even at all if someone says, I am strictly heterosexual, or says, I am strictly bisexual, I'm strictly gay, I'm strictly lesbian, or I'm strictly Transylvite? Does that become an issue here in Europe? If somebody, therefore, in the same vein says, I'm strictly Roman Catholic, does that mean they hate all the world of other Christian theologies and orientations and religions, so to say? It would be ridiculous to say that. But to say, I hold on the pure conduct and pure view of the Gelugpa tradition, so I do not need to practice other traditions or mix the practices of other traditions into my practice, because this is sufficient for me. I'm satisfied with this. What is the harm in saying that? How does that make you biased and sectarian? How does that make you fundamental and conservative, narrow-minded, etc., etc.? You have the guts to say these things to people who want to practice Gelugpa tradition purely. You do not have the guts to say that to the Islamist, in Arab countries who want to practice a very conservative form of Islam. They have the Wahhabi ideology, which practices Islam in a very strict way. Why don't you raise a finger at them? Why don't you question them? You are sectarian, because they do not accept the Quran or any other word that speaks of a God in the sense of Yaqub or Jehovah. They only accept Allah. Why don't you raise a finger at them? Apparently, if the Wahhabi Islamists are exporting terrorism or encouraging fundamentalism and conservatism, where are you as an international spokesperson to tell them this is not wrong? You're doing it with helpless, ignorant, humble, innocent Tibetans who did not even have any agenda of bias or discrimination, but you put a whole long list and a whole big crown of accusations on their head, and you made them all look like idiots, which is unfair and which is untruthful. The fact is that the Tibetan leadership wants to consolidate his power, his ascendancy over Tibetans of all segments of Tibetans within the Tibetan diaspora and also the Tibetan autonomous region. We very well know that he has a long history of an axe to grind with the communist Chinese. We also know that he has a muscle to show to them, that he has the constituency of all Tibetans willing to follow him. So therefore, for him, if he becomes only solely a leader of Gelugpas, that does not really consolidate his authority in the eyes of the Chinese, nor in the eyes of the UNO, nor in the eyes of the international community. So where did this thing that the Tibetan leadership is the supreme head of all Tibetan Buddhism come into existence? It is a hyperbole. It has been recreated by the press here and probably with the help of American White House and politicians here in Europe who have no background, no history, no education, no knowledge, and no feeling. Well, they want an extra muscle or an extra weapon to deal with their own China syndrome and phobia. So there is a man who they can use, and they can say, this is the supreme head of all Tibetan Buddhist traditions here, who's only talking peace. But you, the barbarian Chinese, you savage, ruthless, who do not believe in any religion. So they say, so you say. But is it really so? Are the Chinese that stupid? Are they really savages and barbarians? Is the agenda of the Tibetan leadership that pure and that saintly? Then what's wrong with the papal institution in Vatican? What's wrong? There's a better pope this time. There's Franciscan, and he's trying to undo the mistakes of what the church has been doing for centuries. What's wrong with him? Why don't you support him? Why do you have to go all the way to the east to support an exotic Tibetan Lama? So, I come back to my point by saying that this whole idea of non-sectarianism for the Tibetan leadership is all about consolidating his authority, a situation and a fiction that actually never existed in Tibet. For example, if you are saying the Ganden throne holder, Ganden Tripa as most of you call him, no, Ganden Tripa is the supreme head of all Gelugpas. Well, as an executive head, he definitely is a supreme leader. But the 3 seats in Tibet, the 3 monastic seats of Drepung Sera Ganden, Gyude and Gyume, these are all autonomous institutions of Buddhist seats of learning. All of the monks inside there were not necessarily disciples of the Ganden throne holder. So if you are saying the Gelugpa tutelary head, the supreme papa of the Gelugpas is the Ganden throne holder, not all Gelugpas accept the spiritual teachings and transmission of a Ganden throne holder, because there is a story behind it, there is a reason behind it. We don't have to go into the details of all that. Likewise, the Dalai Lama or the Panchen Lamas in Tibetan history, maybe one that is the Dalai Lama, may be called the sun, and the other, the Panchen Lama, may be called the moon. But that doesn't mean everybody receives teachings or receives transmission or is a disciple of the Dalai Lama or the Panchen Lama. This kind of imagination, or highly utopian kind of imagination, or an egalitarian kind of an imagination, is the recreation of the press here in the West. Apparently, unfortunately, it is the recreation of the press and Western writers, so-called Western Buddhologists or Tibetologists, who have created this impression, because this was not a reality. So there is a streak of innocence and a streak of naivety here in the West with many people. So this is the problem. Now, therefore, what I'm trying to tell you is factually this. There was no supremacy of the leadership of the Tibetan God King in even Tibet. His jurisdiction was limited to Lhasa. How come then, after coming into exile, that he suddenly appears, or so to say, becomes the religious and temporal head of all Tibetans? Now, if this is not a myth, what should it then be? Now, if you're going to be angry with me for what I'm saying, you better check on history for yourself, facts for yourself, and not just blame me for being candid and blunt on this camera for saying so. So, finally, if we are going to talk about non-sectarianism, that is the negation of bias towards other traditions and other faiths and other religious belief, you probably may agree with the definition I have given earlier. If not, let's look at it this way. If we are talking about non-sectarianism, probably a word very familiar, a word in proximity or very close to the so-called term non-sectarianism is eclecticism. Now, ecumenicalism. Ecumenicalism is something else, it's purely Christian. Eclectic is a word that we Buddhists have begun to adopt in the recent decades, which seems to be more closer to the term non-sectarianism. Now, those of us who believe and understand the Lamrim, we who believe and understand and practice, or so to say, attempt to practice the Lamrim, we are not authors or authority in the Lamrim, but we do know what the essence of Lamrim is. And one of this is to be able to see all teachings as non-contradictory, whether those teachings are of the Theravadan tradition, common sutra tradition, a tendency of calling them Hinayana, which I would not do. I would not do so. Even that is a rather, let us say, a term for philosophical debates, and not really a way of referring to other believers of other tradition. So let us say, if we are talking about the Sthavira tradition, which is what Theravadan tradition is all about, if we are talking about Sthavira tradition, or we are talking about Chitamatran tradition, we are talking about Madhyamika, Prasangika, which is the tradition that we apparently supposedly follow, but we understand that all of these diverse and different in their opinions and approach to one and the same reality or the view of emptiness as we call it, essentially they are all to be integrated into one individual's practice. We understand the small scope is not the path. The middle scope, from the middle scope, the spiritual practice begins right up to the great scope, which is the ultimate goal for all Mahayana practices. But we do not abandon the lower scope, in which it is important to meditate on the precious human rebirth. It is important to meditate on death and impermanence. It is important to meditate on lower state of the sufferings in lower state of existence. This is important even if it is small scope. This has to be integrated into the practice of the middle scope, where we consider the suffering of samsara at large, particularly with the three suffering, and then we talk about the 12 interdependent links of origination, etc., to be able to gain liberation from samsara, nirvana as the goal. We understand this has to be, the small scope group has to be integrated into the medium scope, and the medium scope has to be integrated to omniscient, the ultimate aim or the goal or objective of reaching enlightenment, wherein wisdom has to be approached. We understand the integration in this way. But if someone was to say, but this is all still the Buddhist path, I would say every different faith or belief, even if it doesn't belong to the four schools or four tenets, every different school and faith and every belief has its values and has its good principles and its virtuous ways of practice. And everything is an example and a means for us to be able to integrate into our practice. For myself, living in South India, I visit Hindu temples every year, every month. And I say to our Gelugpa colleagues, you do not really know how to practice the great consecration. Because it's only the mirror and the 12 ingredients are put in front of you and you use the mantras and all you do is with the mirror. You haven't seen how the Vedic practitioners do it. They do it with the idol of the deity itself and how beautifully they chant with each and every of the mantras. I even say the fire puja, the consecration, the ablution, the practice of mantra. Even if you say this was all from the very beginning of the times, it has all been taken from Vedic traditions and Vedic practices. I always go there. For myself and our community, we celebrate Christmas. We go to the church for the late midnight mass. We have celebrations. I do not even celebrate Tibetan Losar. I celebrate Christmas. I do not celebrate Losar. And it's only during Deepawali, the Hindu festival, that I send cards. I do not send any cards to any Tibetan friends because by that time, when it is Tibetan Losar, I have probably even forgotten that it is Tibetan Losar. That's just to give you a little example of me as the Buddhist Shugden practicing advocate. If you want to call me a Taliban, I'm telling you what I do in my daily life and in my daily activities. So, if you still persist in wanting to call me a Taliban or a fundamentalist, that is your right because you have a mouth and a tongue, but I have a mouth and tongue too. I can also give you an answer. I like lightning if I want to. It's my right, it's your right. Now, non-sectarianism necessarily does not mean making a potpourri, a mixture of all religions. Now, for instance, I will give a very mundane example. If you find a life partner in your life, your spouse or your life partner, whether you're going to marry that person or whether you're just going to live together with that person, you're going to view that person as a jewel amongst persons. You're probably going to speak of your spouse, whether it's a wife or a husband, you're going to say, he is the most handsomest of all, Prince Charming. There is no greater man than him in the world. Naturally, you have to share your life with him. You have to share your bed with him. You probably have to share the same toothbrush and toothpaste with him. If you do not have this attitude towards your spouse or your life partner, and if you say, oh, it's all the same, this man whom I'm sharing my house and the same toothbrush, and another man also is the same. Tomorrow I will share it with another one. You're not into polygamy or polyandry, by the way. I would put it like that. You're not going to be that crazy. If you had a wife, as a spouse, you wouldn't say, she must be beautiful, but there is another woman on the other side of the road who's more attractive and more beautiful than her. Oh, I must have made a mistake. Are you even going to say that when you are inebriated or drunk? Are you going to say that if you get a stroke or if you go insane? That would be the most unkindest and the most stupidest thing to say that. What you would say of your spouse is, this is the best of men, this is the best of women, she is the angel, Dakini of my life, he is the Daka or prince of all Dakas, he is the Heruka. You're going to say he's the best of all, isn't it? The same goes with your own spiritual practice. If you sort of say, oh, it's all the same, chow mein is same, and my Italian pasta is all the same, it's all the same thing, you're not going to mix it together and eat it. You'll get a stomach problem. You have the right to eat it. Today evening you choose to eat Chinese noodle, tomorrow you have Italian pasta, and the day after you have an Indian pasta, if that exists. So, you have a choice, but you're not going to make a mixture of Italian and Indian and Chinese all together, or you're going to end up with a stomach problem. Likewise, talking about non-sectarianism in the sense of what you as the Tibetan religious and political leader are referring to, he wants Gelugpas to engage in Nyingmapa practices, Sakya practices, Kagyu practices, and that too inside the monastic institutions, inside their monastic institutions. Whereas he cannot tell the Nyingmapas, you must also sometime do the Guru Puja, Lama Chopa practice. You must also recite the Miksema sometimes, because all the time reciting Om Guru Padma Siddhi Hum can get a little bit tense and boring. So just to relax you, just to make you more tolerant, maybe you should start reciting Miksema for a change. Has he ever tried that with the Nyingmapas or the Sakyapas? Have you ever heard of any Nyingmapa or Sakyapa reciting the Miksema or doing Guru Puja? But you will hear now in the Sera Seat Monastery, in the Tibetan settlements, even in Ganden, they have had 100,000 Guru Tsog offering. Now this is insanity, this is not Dharma. And if you say this is politics, people in the West simply don't understand. How can this be politics? Tsongkhapa is a monk, he's a scholarly monk, but Guru Rinpoche is exotic with concerts and miraculous powers, and all are the same, all are Buddha. But the same question would arise. Would you say the same with your own spouse or partner? You would say, well, she's my partner. Well, he's my friend. I discovered him somewhere in Milan Street, in the street in Paris. But there is somebody even more beautiful than them, perhaps. You wouldn't say that. You wouldn't say that. Your own practice has to be the dearest and the greatest to you. And that doesn't make you biased or non-sectarian. You would be a fool if you would be saying this. Okay, so why do we say this is a political objective? Is because, as I already have said actually, but at the space and the speed that I am saying this, I presume some of you probably have missed the point. Therefore, for your benefit, I am going to repeat it once again. You want a potpourri of Nyingma, Sakya, Gelu, Kagyu, and even Chonang perhaps, why not the Bumpos? A potpourri of all of this mixed together, and you call this dizzy mix, your cocktail, you call this special cocktail of yours non-sectarian? I'm sorry, I understand that you want supremacy of leadership and consolidation of power amongst all Tibetans, and you want to show that muscle to the Chinese, and you think that you can play hard with the Chinese. The problem is you have not succeeded in this cherished dream or this idea. You have not made Gelugpas more relaxed and better and tolerant by asking them to do Guru Bumso, 100,000 Guru Puja, Guru offerings to Guru Rinpoche. because you have never attempted to ask Nyingma Pas to recite Miksema and to make a Guru Puja, Lama Chöpa offerings. You have not done that. Tell me, give me the day and the time and the year and the moment that you have done that. I will come personally to you to apologize. You have not. I would say to the Tibetan leadership, you have not. You're only trying to attempt this with the Gelugpas, because the Gelugpas down in Depong, Sera, Ganden are naive. By opening a separate institute for science and asking them to study science for what? You are not interested in integrating yourself with Indian society on your neighborhood and your proximity. Go out and recreate an example like that of Mother Teresa's charity. You have loads of money coming from Taiwan, Singapore, Malaysia, and even Europe and America, because you have the name, you have the looks, you have the celebrity status. We Shukden followers are all dumb Talibans. So we don't even look good. We look all stupid. We are all the time, even when we sleep, we are snoring. Gelugpa. So, we are dumb and stupid for you. So what good have they arrived or achieved at by coming to study science? Now, are they going to work with live animals in the laboratories? What kind of science are you talking about? What kind of science? Trying to get science and the scientist. Are you trying to say that you want to become leader of also the scientists? Yeah? Are you going to, you captured the Hollywood, now you want to capture the world of scientists. You want to also put your nose there with the Big Bang theory experiment that's going on somewhere in Geneva. What is your idea? That would be my question. Now finally, coming to the last point about Shukden followers, that when Shukden followers continue with their practice and advocacy, or relying on the practice of Shukden, the protector, then they lose their refuge vows. They lose their pratimoksha vows. Therefore, they more or less disqualify themselves from being Buddhist, or so to say, they annihilate their refuge vows and they are negated from the refuge vows, or so to say, they therefore are void of the refuge. Now, for those who have not, used their intuition and their discriminative awareness to, contemplate or even investigate into this statement, and have simply taken it at face value of the statement of His Holiness, by agreeing with it point blank and saying, yes, Shukden followers, they consider Shukden more important than even Tsongkhapa himself and Buddha Shakyamuni. Is that really true? That is the point. Is that really true? Do Shukden followers really consider Shukden to be even more important than everybody else in the world, and even Buddha Shakyamuni and all of the Buddhas? Do they say Shukden as a spirit and as a ghost and as an evil demon is much greater than the Buddhas themselves? I think the Tibetan leader is making a clown of himself. Incidentally, if somebody would be thinking like this, then it should first and foremost be his own tutors. By the way, it should be the senior tutor, Yongdzin Ling Rinpoche. It should be the junior tutor, Yongdzin Tijang Rinpoche. Now, the fact that the Tibetan leader and his cronies or stooges have in the recent years attempted to waste all their time trying to explain and confuse people by telling people Ling Rinpoche had nothing to do with Dorje Shukden. Did you know that he used to only consider him as a very wrathful protector? And do you know when the Dalai Lama said that I've stopped with this practice, he was so overjoyed and he said, you made the right decision. Now all these stories have cropped up, fabricated in the recent years. Why was Ling Rinpoche himself not available to give this clarification to the world if this was such a fantastic thing about the Dalai Lama's career, life, antecedents, and profile? If this was the greatest thing that the Dalai Lama did, that is, after practicing Dorje Shugden for 25 years, later coming to the conclusion on the advice of his oracles that Dorje Shugden is in fact the axis of all evil and is a powerful demon and spirit who is harmful to the cause of Tibet, to his life, and to harmony and non-sectarianism. How is it possible that he spent 25 years himself relying and practicing Dorje Shugden day and night, calling all the available oracles to help him make his decisions? To carry on with that until he arrived in India, when suddenly he changed his mind. Now, if it was such a spectacular discovery of this century or discovery of the millennium, why did Ling Rinpoche and Tijang Rinpoche not congratulate him on that? I remember the year, which was somewhere in, I probably think it was 1982, because the foremost refuge, Tijang Rinpoche, had by then passed away, so there was only Ling Rinpoche available. And the Dalai Lama had celebrated a silver jubilee, possibly a silver or golden jubilee. I do not know what exactly, silver, platinum, gold, but it must have been one between these that he had celebrated since the time he gave his Geshe examination in Lhasa, Norbulinga, and Ganden and Sera, etc. So it was a celebration. I remember silver coins, the old Tibetan, old-fashioned silver coin, which is like a relic, was distributed to each of the monks. That is the first time, if I clearly remember, that is the first time ever that the Dalai Lama made a substantial offering to the big seats. Yeah, and Ling Rinpoche was there as attending that ceremony, and I remember it very clearly. The Dalai Lama was sitting with his throne facing down at the audience, and Ling Rinpoche was sitting by his right side. And Ling Rinpoche was also felicitated for his being present, and the Dalai Lama prayed and requested him to live long. Ling Rinpoche was also given a blessing scarf and a protection cord from the Dalai Lama. Now, a disciple does not bless the guru, but this is Tibetan custom, where the guru sits below and the disciple sits above. Now, there's a lot to say about that, but let's stop with this. So, that was the time when Ling Rinpoche was present over there, and he was more or less felicitating Ling Rinpoche, and Ling Rinpoche sat with his head down, sitting very humbly there and sort of just nodding his head, but saying nothing. There was a loudspeaker in front of him. His own guru and teacher was present. He could have easily put the loudspeaker in front over there, asked his own guru or teacher to say something. He did not do that. That was a public occasion. After that, I remember, was the last teaching which was given by Ling Rinpoche in the Loseling College, which I completely attended without understanding a word of what was being said, of course. But the fact is, there was an opportunity for Ling Rinpoche to have given a concluding speech and could have said something about it. There was not a single word said about this. Now, the discovery, or as the prime matter of the fact that the Dalai Lama discovered that there was something crazy and something not so good in the Shugden practice, is something which he came to a conclusion in 1974. Precisely speaking, around 1974. Until his two tutors were alive, the tone and the vocabulary and the way he spoke of Dorje Shugden was completely different from what he said in 1996. In 1982, the foremost refuge Tijang Rinpoche passed away. In 1983, Kyabji Yongzin Ling Rinpoche passed away. In 1984, Kyabji Song Rinpoche passed away. And later, some other important figures in the Tibetan society, apparently not lamas, but some other great Tibetan figures, probably from the old aristocracy, because there have been people in the old aristocracy that have been very learned and very knowledgeable in many spheres of Tibetan society, whether you speak of the spiritual or whether you speak of the political, very well educated and very knowledgeable and well informed. I think after the gradual death of all of these people, the oracle of the Dalai Lama, Nechung, started coming out with these controversial statements about Dorje Shugden. And that happened somewhere around in 1994 and 1995. That became